Well, everyone, it's time. The Sylvanas book is out, and we have got all the context that we're going to get. So how does it hold up? Has Christie Golden done what Shadowlands could not? Well, today we're going to dive into the weeds, and you're going to understand. What was Sylvanas getting from Zovaal? Why Teldrassil? Were Sylvanas and Nathanos actually in love? And beyond all of that, is this a good book? Well, there's funny things. If you loved Warcraft 2, then it's a beautiful backdrop to the elves joining the Alliance and what was going on at that time. If you thought the Legacy of the Damned campaign was the best of Warcraft 3, you get to see that through her eyes. And it's really good. If you're a Forsaken player, then this book is also the creation myth of your faction. It provides so many opportunities to engage with Warcraft like never before. Because we just never got enough of Sylvanas in the bloody video game. Then, Sylvanas meets the jailer in the book, and like death coming for the soul of our world, I could kind of feel the life drain from me. But even if this lore is challenging to get along with at times for that more modern stuff, Golden's ability as a writer actually did keep us all there, till the very end, feeling Sylvanas' genuine grief. That's what's almost annoyed me the most about this book. Because at least before it's Zovaal time, Sylvanas is really excellent. The book, that is. The Shadowlandsy stuff even works quite well in isolation. It's just that no matter how good this book is, it ultimately, by an Ian Hazzikostas' own admission from an interview that he gave, funny enough about this book, and we'll take a look at that interview a little bit at the end of this video, it just does show how Blizzard have failed with the game's narrative. As it stands, though, the book is a blast. The audiobook's what we listen to, by the way. It's voiced by Sylvanas herself, Paddy Matheson. She's got a great range. What surprised me is she's just there confidently portraying characters like Anasternian Sunstrider or Nathanos, who, shockingly enough, by the way, actually works really well and is like a hidden star in this book. And I mean, you know I found Nathanos to be really annoying in the game. So kind of wild stuff. And I've got to do the good news self-promo, because if you hit up today's sponsor, audibletrial.com/Bellular, you can get the Sylvanas audiobook for free. Forever. Even if you cancel, it'll just be on your Audible library. But of course, loads of the rest of the Warcraft library is there, so there's a pretty good reason to stay and lots to catch up on. So that's audibletrial.com/Bellular. Sylvanas itself, the book, the audiobook, is a brilliant 15 hours of entertainment that we really did enjoy. At the very least, it's just interesting because it's new perspectives on Warcraft. Okay, let's get into the book, and I'll share my thoughts on the narrative success, or lack thereof, at the very end. We begin in Torghast, Anduin on his knees in a circle of domination runes. Sylvanas stands over him. Unknown to Anduin, or even us, Sylvanas at this point is at her breaking point and will soon turn against the jailer. But the only way to explain the height of madness that she's gotten to is basically by telling Anduin of the injustice in her life. She is convinced, somehow, that he'll actually believe her and willingly join the jailer, which in a way would kind of like redeem her from her worries and her doubts. Now this conversation frames the whole narrative of the book, but also of Sylvanas' journey. Anduin is an emotional foil and a reader insert, but more than that, he is the one connection that Sylvanas has to why she walked this path in the first place. Christie Golden tells us that this book is about family right at the start, and that is what it's about. It's about the Windrunner family, so let's talk about it. Sylvanas has an older Silder, Ilaria, who is pegged to succeed their mother, Larissa, as Ranger General. Then there's the younger sister, Verisa, the peacemaker, and their father, Verath, who is a diplomat and an advisor to the Sunstrider, who are, of course, the line of royalty. And into this happiness comes Lirath, a brother who she calls a little son. Holding him up in her arms, she promises to never let any harm come to him. And this sets up the base condition for Sylvanas' life before we met her in Warcraft 3. it is a condition of mostly happiness. These are the golden times that she will hold up against every injustice. Her own sense of justice also develops through this. When Illyria is tested to become Ranger General, she's got to kill a giant springpaw. She almost fails, but Sylvanas saves her life. Larissa, though, is furious that Sylvanas intervened. Sylvanas believes it's unfair because she saved her sister's life. So here, the ends justified the means, and her mother was wrong. The only thing that can cool Larissa's anger is Varath, her father. So Sylvanas learns from an early enough age that the way to escape responsibility is through the ones that you love. Some obvious Nathanos-like spoilers here. A few other things happen in the book, like Sylvanas accidentally poisoning Southriel, the party-going NPC in Eversong, and getting banished from his parties. There's lots of things going on. But one thing is that Sylvanas hates the structural inequality of the elven society. She kind of hates its assumed perfections, and just generally rejects it all. She's more of a rebellious character. She doesn't like the highly stratified, elf society in the way that it's set up, and the way that it's all so proper. And it's right into this worldview that she's soon going to meet a man that she very much falls for. Illyria ends up refusing to become Ranger General. She leaves to go and fight with the Alliance, meaning that Sylvanas is now in line to become Ranger General. The Amanai trolls are growing bold, and on their trail, Sylvanas meets a lumpy and ugly human, Nathanos. And the book's really clear, Nathanos is not a charming guy, before he gets that, hot body from his cousin that we see in-game. But he is confident that the trolls are only so bold because they have an alliance with the Horde, by which of course I mean the old Horde. So they bring this information to Silvermoon. And Nathanos in this book is portrayed as, quick-witted, confident, and deeply empathetic. He's actually a very successful and likable character here. He knows what Sylvanas is feeling, but also he's not a pushover. And overall, he is a stone for her to lean on. He's also the ugliest thing she's ever seen, but that's kind of what she loves. He's a bit more gruff. He's the opposite to the perfection of Silvermoon, the sort of royalty and all that she's been born in and around. The counterpoint to all the unfair bullshit and annoying bullshit that she sees in her daily life, and that's why she takes to him so much. Of course, Anasternian ignores this Horde situation, so Sylvanas and her father politic him into sending a diplomat to Lordaeron. Varath is sent with Larissa and her Farstriders, only for them to be murdered by orcs on the way. And this is when we get a major key to the emotional dimension of Sylvanas. When she's told, when she sees the bodies for the first time, when she demands to lead the investigation into what happened, each time Sylvanas drowns her grief with action and responsibility. She lets herself feel no emotion but driven anger. That is a way that quite a few people do tend to deal with grief. Now, the Horde finally march in Silvermoon, and honestly, we just get a pretty awesome fantasy battle. The Farstriders are pushed back until Illyria and Terralion, of course, turn up with the Alliance army, but the Horde ended up striking so deep that they reached the Windrunner Spire, and in that raid, Lyrath, Sylvanas' little son, her younger brother that she really doted on, he is killed. Sylvanas had refused to train him because she would always be there to protect him. He didn't need that. Maybe she wanted him to have more of a choice, more agency in his life. Whatever it is, ultimately, she feels she failed. He couldn't defend himself. He wasn't trained. He's dead. This was unfair, but she still believed she had a choice in saving him, so at least she could blame herself. It's going to get a whole lot worse for her, though. Arthas' vision of Calvalas. So, Frostmourne impales Sylvanas, and for a very brief moment, she feels a promise of warmth. She feels the Arbiter's judgment. That almost makes you think that she would be destined to a vaguely good fate. But just as quickly, her soul is torn in two. Arthas then looses Sylvanas on Silvermoon, telling her to kill the innocents first. Her banshee wail turns into a song of death, and 8 out of every 10 is killed by the Scourge. And Sylvanas basically ends up realizing that If Lirath still had have lived, if he did not die in that raid, she would have killed him. She had no choice but to lose the one that she loved. And throughout this, Arthas is described, I think, more properly in a way that helps us with any of the jailer related concerns. He is described as being more cruel and willful than we've seen before. He toys with Sylvanas, giving her enough independence to fuel his cruel jokes. And she uses that independence eventually to find her body. And as Ner'zhul grew weaker on the Frozen Throne, she drew the undead allies around her, starting to make her Forsaken. She makes an attempt on Arthas' life, but fails. Now, her entire motivation at this point becomes vengeance. This is when the Forsaken come together as an instrument of that vengeance. That's what the Forsaken are at this point. And one seemingly willing servant of this is the brain-rotted Putris. Sylvanas mistakes Putris' enthusiasm with basically thinking that he's trying to find a cure to undeath, to which Putris is just not impressed. He basically says, am I not beautiful? You know, big, gangly, horrible undead Putris. And she now realizes that they are Forsaken, that there is no way of going back. And what he's actually enthusiastic about is the new plague. It's experimented on innocent living and traitorous Forsaken. Sylvanas tells us that all means justify the end of killing Arthas. That's all that she cares about. This is the exact emotion, though. This is the same sort of thing that would eventually lead to her pulling that trigger on Teldrassil. But before that, Wrath of the Lich King. Wrath begins, and Sylvanas describes Zeppelin after Zeppelin of willing Forsaken warriors, her hand of vengeance flying to Northrend. Each one loaded with plague. She remains in Lordaeron, but tells Putris to take any opportunity he can to kill Arthas with the new plague. He responds with a wry smile. Of course, the Wrathgate incident and the coup in Undercity are now quite well understood. It was not directly Sylvanas' fault, but she was foolish to let it go that far. What is interesting, though, is that when Varamathras makes his move, he shouts, "I will be the one to herald the Master's victory, not you." And in a bit of an eye roll, we of course now know that he's talking about the jailer, but at this point in time, Sylvanas actually doesn't. So the coup is stopped, as we know, with the Alliance and Horde liberating Undercity, and almost a war breaking out. Sylvanas talks about legitimately respecting Thrall for believing her to be innocent. And Thrall again is held up as another counterpoint to the inherent injustice of life. Like Sylvanas, he knew a lot of pain, grief, and loss, but he had ultimately ended up making the world a better place from those circumstances. Here things get a bit weird, because Sylvanas is in the Halls of Reflection, and there's a quest with her after that. But at the point of Arthas' death, she's actually in the Undercity, according to the book, and she basically feels Frostmourne shatter from afar. She feels Arthas' death. But of course, the world would move on. Garrosh becomes war chief, and with Putris putting the Forsaken very much in the spotlight, the Forsaken are ordered to attack Gilneas. The Lich King was dead, but Sylvanas was not free. It took her a long time to eventually go to Icecrown. She basically calls it a pilgrimage. When she gets there, all she feels is the grief and the pain that she's been suppressing boil up, and a searing emptiness. Killing Arthas was the one shred of justice in the world that you could say maybe the world even owed her, and even that she was denied. It cuts before Sylvanas throws herself from the top of Icecrown back to Torghast, and you can see a transformation happen in Anduin. Not only does he, of course, have a pretty finely tuned sense of empathy, but he's beginning to understand where Sylvanas is actually coming from, what led her to do all of this. He asks what Zovaal could give her for such a high cost, and she responds, everything. So let's talk about what she actually meant. Holding back Eternal Night for revenge didn't work. She jumped from Icecrown and was thrown into a suffocating realm of pain. Valkyr then gave her visions of the invasion of Gilneas. She sees the Forsaken destroyed as the tip of Garrosh's spear, and everything she had worked for was nothing. The jailer then showed himself, and beyond anything else, Sylvanas felt no pain in his presence. So, funny that. He tells her that they are essentially the same, that they are people who fought for something greater than themselves, and that the universe made them suffer for it, each twisted into an effigy of their own damnation. He explains his whole context, rebellion and imprisonment, right up to creating Arthas, and the whole point of that. It made the anger boil inside, thinking about her own life. And she realized that no one could escape, because escape wasn't part of the Maker's design, that the whole thing is unfair. The design is just indifferent, and that's flawed. Every injustice Sylvanas had felt was some plan or something set into motion before she existed. Basically, she gets caught up in a fatalistic spiral, thinking, I had no agency in this. The universe gave me all these terrible hardships. It's all so unfair. Nothing's fair. I can't even see my family in death. So she asks the big question, why her? Why are they having this conversation? Really, Sylvanas survived the ashes of Arthas' failure, his vows, family, friends, and self. He betrayed all of them. And now, in her current strange state with all that's happened to her and Zovaal would finally have an opportunity to show every soul that their lives and the eternity, all the things they faced, that was a lie, that they would break that and bring true freedom. And this is exactly what Sylvanas was talking about when she said she would set us free. Basically, this fatalistic outlook in things where we're all just slaves to the Maker's grand big plan, and where the Shadowlands are just a place where a robot sorts you out, regardless of who you really are, what you think, or what you want. The Valkyr takes Sylvanas around the Shadowlands to Revendreth, where she sees Zul'jin, the Amani warlord, and she's disgusted that she gets thrown into the maw while he gets redemption. Then she sees a realm of liquid fire, and she thinks it a realm of punishment, where a fire eel flits by, and Sylvanas is told that this is its heaven, its afterlife. That in this life, this eel devoured its mate to save them from a slow, painful death, an act of love. Sylvanas then asks about the mate that was devoured, that, do they get to be together? The answer is no, that was not the Arbiter's judgment. In the Valkyr's experience, no one gets to be together with their family, with their loved ones in eternity. So Sylvanas has seen all this unfair shit. She's had Lirath die, realized that he would have died anyway because she turned into a banshee and helped sack her own city. She's just feeling so betrayed by the world, and always is able to think back to her younger, happier days and contrast those to where she's actually ended up. And really, this is it. This is why Sylvanas joins the jailer. The final thing is that through the pain, the injustice, death, war, and strife, she had always held on to those beautiful moments back home in Quel'Thalas. She was convinced that one day, through the veil of death, that she would be there with Lirath, Varisa, Alleria, Larissa, Varath, all of them. She would see her family again. But the cosmos was indifferent, and it didn't care. And to her, that's just not fair. The jailer asks that once she has made her choice, to just send a Valkyr to him, and that she should be on the lookout for a few things. First, a child of the blood will come to her. And then we have 5 prophecies. In short, that Legion will return, that you'll become War Chief, the Sargeras sword, Azerite shattering, and the veil between realms. It's a very slight bit more cryptic than that, but basically it is that, and she can see these prophecies come true. Okay, let's go back to things. After this encounter with the jailer, Sylvanas returns with some renewed purpose. She commands the Forsaken through Gilneas, destroying the kingdom and killing Gen's son Liam. And we get this great window into her thinking at this point in time, because she regrets killing Liam, but only for a moment. It is immediately replaced with the self-righteous lie that it was worth it, because one day Gen and Liam would get to spend eternity together, just like with the Windrunners. And I would say here, if you've ever watched the television show Mr. Robot, which you absolutely should, perhaps think about, a cult-like group of antagonists in that show and the things that they end up believing in and just how dogmatic they are about that belief. And I think you get similar vibes to how basically somebody like Sylvanas can get completely turned about in this cult-like thinking. The narrative then blasts through the expansions. During Garrosh's trial, she notices Varrock Sarfang for the first time, and basically sees another person who reality has been unfair to. I mean, just think about his son. A lot happens here, like Sylvanas musing on turning Verisa into a Forsaken, basically so they can be together. But most importantly, Sylvanas tells Nathanos the truth about her suicide and about the jailer. And Nathanos, he doesn't care much for the grandiose cosmic stuff, but he fixates on her suicide, saying, "If I lost you, then it would be the end of me." He was now the champion in her mad war. So the Legion had invaded. That's Prophecy 1. Khadgar brings everyone to a meeting before the Broken Shore, and here Sylvanas sees Anduin's strength for the first time. And then Anduin sees a little bit of her brother. The Broken Shore, of course, is a disaster, but even as Varian dies, Sylvanas thinks about Anduin becoming an orphan and just the injustice of it all. So she's always seeing the worst and always seeing the unfairness. And then with Vol'jin, Sylvanas is shocked by his defeat. How could he not have seen that spear? It was unthinkable, impossible, unjust. Because it's goddamn Vol'jin, all, favored by the Loa and everything. Of course, it was Muzala, who then ends up telling Vol'jin to announce Sylvanas as war chief, speaking the same words that the jailer had prophesied to Sylvanas. And at this point, she's like, okay, I think this stuff is beginning to turn. She starts to notice. She's even more certain than ever. In time, thanks to her, all of these wronged people would be better because she will fix the afterlife, she will help fix the cosmos, and finally there can be a just end where people can be happy with their loved ones. Then cuts to an interlude, and Sylvanas straight up says it, that he understands. Not why she did it, but why or how she was convinced to do the terrible things that she did. No matter how twisted it was, Soval basically gave her the one thing that she had denied herself, a degree of hope. Her first mission was getting the Soul Cage. It was long speculated that this was for the future of the Forsaken, to get Valkyr, to make more, and that's what Gen thought he was destroying. And honestly, I think that may just have been Blizzard's plan for that at the time. But anyway, Sylvanas thought he was only taking his own future, because if it all goes to plan, he's never going to see Liam when he dies. He's never going to have that happy ending, so she thinks it's for the greater good. And the Soul Cage ultimately was to be used to basically divert souls away from the Halls of Valor and send them straight to the Maw, which is what the jailer would want. The next two prophecies then land together. Sargeras stabs the planet, and Azerite appears. Now the prophecies really are coming true. So the jailer sent his child of blood, the Dreadlord Mal'Ganis. He goes full exposition mode, telling Sylvanas that the Arbiter was broken by the death-twisted world soul of Argus. She realizes that Sargeras, in a way the 0 point of all of her grief since the orcs had invaded Azeroth, that too was kind of the jailer's fault. But at this stage, she's drunk too much of the Kool-Aid, and she is convinced that it's all justified, because the fundamental system of the whole cosmos is just so unfair to everyone, and they just don't understand. They just don't see the unfairness the way that she does. Now that every soul is sent screaming into the Maw, it's time to launch the war to end all wars. Before that, though, she returns to her family grave, looking for the truth that had sent her down this path. Duty to the cosmos now dwarfed any emotion that she had felt, but still a small, stubborn piece of her could not let go. Ultimately, they would all be together in eternity. Sylvanas now starts to get increasingly unhinged. At the gathering, she kills many of the Forsaken for trying to defect to the Alliance. This was just another betrayal in a long line of betrayals, and she wouldn't stand for it anymore. No more of this unfair bullshit. They would either be loyal to her, or they would be anima. And that leads us to Teldrassil. Stormwind is the initial plan, but the road there would be too long to take and the jailer needed souls now. So in a preemptive move, the Horde struck Teldrassil. On the coast of Darkshore, Sylvanas finds herself standing with Delaran, promising Delaran that she'll be with her loved ones soon. Convinced that suffering was finite and that the joy of a fixed, proper eternity that is fair, where you spend time with your loved ones, that joy would be infinite, Sylvanas ordered the World Tree set aflame. Of course, she's furious, but that's her cult-like reasoning behind it. The Horde then starts to realize the depth of her insanity, and a rebellion begins. And now we come to near the close of the book, Orgrimmar, which is really a moment of sorrow. Because throughout all of this, Nathanos had been very loyal to her. He had been by her side and committed any atrocity asked of him. But he never really believed in the jailer stuff. No, he believed in her. And I was expecting this moment to be so cheesy, but it actually works. I'll kind of paraphrase. Nathanos says, "For all the jailer's words to the contrary, we do have one, a choice. We don't have to stay here. Let them fight it out. Let the jailer have his souls. Bane, Anduin, Jaina, there will be enough. Do this last thing, and it could be over." But Sylvanas couldn't understand him. When she says that when all this is done, all worlds will rejoice, Nathanos replies that Sylvanas is his world. This little world that is ours, and ours alone. We can walk away, disappear, be forgotten, be together. Sylvanas bitterly replies, "And be happy," as a question. They both knew it was kind of impossible, but in that moment, Nathanos had given her the one thing that even the jailer had really failed to, and that was a real sense of hope. As quick as that moment came, Varrock screamed out for Mak'gora, and of course, everything that we know happened. When Saurfang lands a strike on her by splitting Charlemagne, we get the full, twisted scope of Sylvanas' thinking. Her whole life, she had been trying to help, and it always had been thrown in her face. Illyria and the Springpaw, she messed up her sister's, Farstrider stuff. Now she's in trouble, even though she saved her sister from a dangerous situation. Lirath from Naivety in War, her parents, the Kaldori, who, of course, rejected her in Undeath. Forsaken, like Putris, those who betrayed her at the Gathering. And now every ignorant and pathetic creature that ever existed. They would call her mad, but they had not seen what she had. Everything, the Horde, the Alliance, love, loss, suffering, injustice, everything was nothing compared to what she wanted for the cosmos. How she wanted to fix everything and make it kind of work. Make it be worthwhile in the end. Again, I'm bringing up a little bit of the twisted, complete insanity thinking that a certain prime antagonist in the series, Mr. Robot, has, but of course that works because that's completely sold while you're, watching the show. Here we find out in the book, but it does, within the context of the book, really quite work and make sense from Sylvanas' point of view. So all these people are nothing, and that's what she told them. They don't understand. She was done caring about anything beyond the grand future that we would all share when her plan with Zovaal comes together. It cuts to Torghast for the final time. Anduin knows the rest of the story. But he realizes something. This whole time, Anduin has been an emotional foil to the jailer's persuasion. Sylvanas had only ever wanted the happiness of her family, and the jailer was able to twist that into the pure evil that Sylvanas became. But in Anduin, she saw her original desire, to be happy. Anduin understands her, and tells her, "Your goal is worthy, but not in the way the jailer intends." And by the end of the book, Anduin is also actually convinced that the cosmos is fundamentally flawed. And if you think about what we see in the Shadowlands, frankly, it's a load of cold, shitty bullshit. The afterlives of the Shadowlands kinda suck. It's not what a religion would think of, or anything like that for an afterlife. When Anduin completely understands her, they make a connection. And in that connection, something in Sylvanas shatters. But she's not ready yet, so she just lashes out because she can't really process that information. She calls him a fool and leaves Anduin to his fate. Sylvanas was a victim of trauma, and her only defense was to smother it with anger and responsibility. Anduin's empathy and the retracing of her journey to the pinnacle of Torghast made her realize that the ends don't always justify the means. Yes, she saw her little brother in Anduin. He was the little lion to Lyrath's little son. But more than that, he understood her. The epilogue of the book is set in the Maw. Pelagos is now the Arbiter, and the big difference here is that he is judging souls with compassion. No longer will fire eels be separated from their family, and I suppose the same for everyone else as well. He will actually compassionately take on board what people want when Pelagos decides where they go. So Sylvanas, in a way, got what she wanted. Not the way that she expected, and you could say that her, in a way, getting what she wanted is a bit iffy, given everything terrible that she very much has literally done. And it's a funny thing too, because so many of the moments in this book, especially after Frostmourne, that is with soul-shattered Sylvanas. So she definitely seems very unhinged and crazy, but ultimately that reflects how the shattering of her soul opened up such a strong opportunity for Zovaal to manipulate what was left. And really with all this, Sylvanas ends up being granted the thing that she was denied the day that Arthas took her soul, a choice. Even if it took her an eternity, she now has a way back to happiness. She's now able to get Nathanos and to spend a very long time in the Maw actually doing meaningful work. She hears the sound of clanking metal behind her and realizes with some surprise that somebody has came with her. We do not find out who, but if there's anyone in the cosmos who understands the pain that Sylvanas has felt, it's Anduin. If there's anyone who can bring Anduin back from his own trauma, it is this new, reconstituted Sylvanas that far more understands herself, more than really ever before. In the book, Sylvanas wonders, when will the shockwaves of Silvermoon stop? And I think at this point in the story they have stopped. And Sylvanas got the end that the book, admittedly, begrudgingly, makes you think fits. Now, the concept of time the Shadowlands is played with is smidge here. Basically, the jailer in his conversation says, hey, time works pretty weird in the Shadowlands. You can't stay here talking to me for too long, because if you do, you might return and find out that your corpse is completely rotted. And that does make me think, Sylvanas could spend 5,000 years in the Maw, from her own perception. That's how long she could literally spend cleaning up the Maw. Meaning that whenever she does return, she's going to be very, very, very different indeed. Not different, but she'll have had time to mull things over, right? So that's one of the interesting things about the way that time works in the Maw. So it's not just her going and doing a few dailies. It is set up that she could spend a very grim quantity of time in the Maw. Of course, there could even be a little thing there that could mirror Illyria through how time works bizarrely in the Twisting Nether, spending hundreds of years fighting the Burning Legion. So with that said, I'm going to pull it out. I'm going to end this video just by sort of pulling it back a little bit and talking about this book at the broader context. You know, is it good? Have Blizzard won? Have they lost? Is it a success or a failure? There's still so much to wrap up and go through here with this book. We've tried to lay it out here so you understand the emotional journey of Sylvanas, but I know you've got so many burning questions, and this is already a massively long video, and we couldn't do it all in one video, right? So we are going to have a video that just kind of goes, you know, point by point, bam, 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 through your biggest questions, like the lore bits, you know, how did this work? How did that work? And a few of the bizarre inconsistencies that we have found, but I want to wrap by talking about the book itself, because basically, Christie did a great job here. And that does make sense. I mean, as an example, you know Lord of the Clans? Like, that's the book that is the foundation of the Horde. Written a long time ago now, but she wrote that in just a couple of weeks back then, which is pretty damn impressive. And she was given a very difficult task with this book, and we've even learned in interviews that a whole bunch of this she actually did in her personal time. like writing this book before she would go into work, using her lunch breaks and free time to do research work for the book. So it seems weird how this actually meshed in with her job at Blizzard. But anyway, a very hard book to do because, look, some people have called this book a patch job for the narrative. I'm one of those people. And this book, I believe, absolutely is that. This book is doing the narrative lifting that Shadowlands and Battle for Azeroth could not. So rather than spend a long time blasting Blizzard, as you know I could, and you know what I think, in a way, the most brutal thing to do is to remind them of their own words. Ian's words actually do the best job here. We should all be reminded of the interview that Ian gave before this book was published. This is the direct quote from him. He says, "If you ever need to read a book outside of the game to understand a major quest or plot in World of Warcraft, then that would mean we have caused a significant narrative disruption." Those are his words. Considering then the success of this book, explaining the underlying motivations of our antagonists, and really doing a great job with the character of Sylvanas, I think we can therefore say that Shadowlands is, by the game director's own words, a significant narrative disruption. It's kind of a diplomatic way to put it, but I mean, he said if you feel like you need a book to fully get what's going on in the game, then it's a significant narrative disruption. And I feel that this story, if it had a bit more time in Shadowlands, and if all the content, major stuff in this book, was actually in the game throughout the whole journey of Sylvanas, instead of her always being the, brutal mystery waifu, what's Aphrosabi going to do with her next, then it could have been great. And that Aphrosabi thing is not a get out of jail free card for the modern lore team, because he stopped working World of Warcraft in patch 8.1, from what I've learned. They could have made it work after that, and they fucked it up. So Christie pulled a great book out of a complete mess. Christie Golden is basically deadlifting the lore with this book, and the rest of the team weren't able to pull their weight. So the overall story is a complete mess. This book is really successful on a character level. If this shit had been in the game, this story with Sylvanas, at least in the character level, actually would have all worked out great. This book isn't in the game. I mean, the book also has got its quirks. Like, did patch 8.3 really happen in a few hours? I don't think so, given the book that bridges those events. So there are some quirks, a lot of things to clown on, or some things to clown on anyway, and I would have expected more sort of correctness QC. Now, mistakes like this are super common when writing, even when it's subject matter, it happens to me all the time in first drafts, because, you're just going bam, 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 putting your ideas down on the page. Big thing, you don't edit while you write. That's the number one way to just sit with a blank page for hours. But I then think of exploring Azeroth Kalimdor, and it seemed to lack a bit of lore quality control as well. But still, on the level of the characters, this book really works. It's no excuse for years of butchered narrative, but I can absolutely say it was a very enjoyable listen for myself and Jared. I think if you like the characters involved, then you're probably going to love this book. So, my review of the book's really good. The story here is really good. I really like the characters. And Paddy Matson does a fantastic job in the narration of the audiobook. We obviously can't remove it from its overall lore context. Now, if you want to help out the channel, of course, today's sponsor is audibletrial.com/Bellular. If you go there, you'll, of course, be able to create a free, account with the free trial. That'll get you a credit. You can spend that credit on World of Warcraft Sylvanas. And once that's there, even if you cancel your Audible subscription, it'll always be in your Audible account forever. So it's 15 hours of really quite brilliant audiobook, which, because I commute home sometimes and all that, it's just nice to have an audiobook to keep me company. So that's what I do. You can do that by checking them out with the links down below. Other than that, thanks for bearing with me for this big, long video. I hope I've made some things make sense to you. And that's it. Thanks. I'll see you next time.